So I'm a bit of a nerd. Any nerds in the house? I'm a bit of a nerd. Pastor and I, we do get along in this world where we do deep research on crazy things. I'm a big fan of Elon Musk, kind of a fan of him. I follow people who has this faith in changing the world. You know, whenever you follow, he just speaks like, I'm changing everything. Like, I'm not settling for the norm. I'm changing everything. And if you follow a little bit about his story, he has started a few companies, Tesla being one of them. But the other company that I've been following is SpaceX. If some of you are just now hearing about SpaceX, it's been around since 2002. So over 20 years, this company has been around, okay? And it took them 4 years. The first 4 years, they launched 3 rockets. First 4 years. 3 rockets, and I'm telling you, 0 rockets made it to orbit. In fact, they all exploded. And so I remember watching this documentary, and this is after the fact, in hindsight, and Elon's just talking about the time. He's like reminiscing about the hard times when all of these failures happened, and you could just see how distraught he was, the sacrifice that was given. But all of that led to year 6, when they launched their first successful rocket into orbit. Okay, this was a big deal, because this was the first time a private company had launched a rocket into orbit. And he kept pushing the envelope even further. The first time, by year 13, I know we're moving fast, year 13, the first time they were able to land the rocket back onto Earth. Now think about this. The millions and billions of dollars that they invest in this rocket to shoot it out, that goes to waste. This is the first time they were able to bring it back to use it again. Imagine every time you go to work with your car blows up. And you gotta go buy a new car. See, reusable cars, reusable rockets, okay? And so it's been incredible to see the first 4 years, for 6 years, the little that they did. This year, they broke records by just in 2023 to this month right now, they have 74 orbital missions already. And that is a world record, okay? Not NASA, not anybody else that was able to pull that off. They were able to beat out number 2, which was SpaceX in last year that they launched 61 rockets. So they just keep on moving. It's incredible to see. I'm the nerd in there. So it's incredible to see these feats happen. These geniuses, these engineers, these scientists come together, the sacrifice, the late nights, the calculations, all of those things in order to make these things happen. And you gotta wonder how Elon and these engineers were able to pull that off. It's because every design, every math equation, every calculation that they made, everything works in tandem with the way God created the world and the laws of the universe. These laws that we live by, these laws, you guys have heard of these scientific laws like Newton's law of gravity. That's a pretty important one, you know? It makes sure that when we're driving on the freeway to work that we just don't all of a sudden just float away. That'd be a bad day. You know, these are the laws that keep us grounded. These are the laws that help us plan every aspect of our lives. Scientific laws, constant and unchanging. In the same way, there are constant in scientific laws and natural laws. God has also designed absolute spiritual laws. Absolute moral laws that has been established by God. Today, I'm gonna talk about one of those. It's the law of sowing and reaping. Everyone say, you reap what you sow. That's right, we've heard it all of our lives. You reap what you sow. So this law, written throughout the Bible, you could see testaments of reaping and sowing. And this concept has been borrowed and twisted up by the world, renamed to things like karma and attraction, cause and effect. But the end of the day is God designed this law. And if we know the formula, we could be using it to shape our lives. Sowing and reaping, it's no surprise. Every single person I've ever sat with, developed counsel, every person probably in this room wants to live a life that is fruitful. that is impactful, that is full of purpose. We want this in our lives. And so if we want a fruitful life, the harvest of that life is determined by the seeds that we sow. You reap that harvest from the seeds that we sow. If this law that God gave us, if the formula is there and we know the formula, we can actually reverse engineer this. You know, if you want apples, you don't want plant seeds from an orange. It just doesn't work like that. And so in our lives, why don't we see it that way? What are we planting in our lives? If we want peace in our household, in our marriage, are we sowing seeds of communication? Seeds of patience? Seeds of gratitude and appreciation? Because we want that. If you want to impact others, are we sowing seeds of servanthood? How are we ever going to impact others if we don't serve them? If we want a life that display, a life that is just full of generosity, then sow your time, sow your finances, share your resources. This is the way you harvest that life of abundance, that life of purpose and impact that God wants for your life. We have to know that sowing is our responsibility. Sowing seeds, they're our responsibility. In 1 Corinthians chapter 3, during this time, Paul has been teaching the gospel and sharing the gospel. And there was another man named Apollos, and he also came out there and started teaching and sharing about the gospel. And the people started becoming divided. Some people were like, I follow Paul. And another group of guys were like, I don't know about that. I follow Apollos. Like, we wouldn't understand anything about that today. But, just kidding. This is what Paul says, okay? He says in chapter 3, verse 6, I planted the seed, Apollos watered it, but God has been making it grow. And so if sowing is our responsibility, growing is God's responsibility. Okay. A few weeks ago, I was talking to Pastor Jared, and we were talking about marriages and how difficult marriages are, and there's a lot of struggle in our marriages in the church and beyond, everywhere. And so he told me about his parents, Barbara and Steve. They are part of this ministry in their church called NAME. I'm not 100% sure what the acronym is, but it's about marriage, okay? And so they were telling me that they counsel marriages. And so it's actually training and empowering couples in the church and just preparing them so that they can counsel other marriages in the church. And I was like, man, this is incredible. We definitely need something like this. And so we set up a phone call, and Lisa and I, 2 weeks ago, we sat on a Zoom or on a phone call with Barbara and Steve, and we started asking them about this ministry. Because it wasn't just normal counseling, it was crisis counseling. It was like marriages that were really going through a rough patch, and they just said, we just need somebody in our lives. And that's what they ended up, they started doing this. They've been doing it for 10 years, and they started telling us about the wonderful stories of impact, the lifelong relationships that they have built because of the couples they're counseling. Even though it lasted only 3 or 6 months, it's been 3, 6, 9 years, and they still have a relationship with each other. And they were telling me all these wonderful things. And we asked the question, we said, what is the percentage of a couple that is in a dire situation, in a crisis situation, that they get restored? And she said, about 2 or 3 out of 10. And Lisa and I, we responded just like that. It's like, man, you're investing into these marriages. And eventually we kept talking, and I asked, how do you handle that? How do you handle spending 6 months counseling a couple, sending them off knowing that they're not going to be restored? Because I was struggling, but Barbara, she was like, she had the answer. She was like, Pastor Q, it's not our job. We sow seeds. We sow seeds. I can't transform their heart. I can display the word. I can show them the word. I can show them maybe a couple of my experiences, but just the way God designed marriage, I can't transform my heart. That's God's job. I just sow seeds. And the seeds that we sow, she told me that there was this woman that sent a couple off thinking that, man, there's no way that they've sowed these seeds, but they just don't see that this couple is going to be restored. Years later, they run into them and they love each other. They're thriving. They love God. They're doing ministry together. So the seeds that we sow matter, but that's our responsibility, is to sow seeds. This reminds me of the parable of the sower in the book of Mark chapter 13, where the farmer goes out and sows seeds. And some of these seeds, they landed on the path, and the birds came and ate them. Some landed on the rocky soil where the soil was thin, so they grew up real fast, but they were scorched by the sun. The third types of seed landed on thorny ground, and when they grew, they were choked out. And then the seeds that landed on good soil returned 100-fold. And Jesus later on, a few verses later, explained that the seeds were about the word of God. But what I also learned about this principle is that it's not my job for the fruit to grow. When the farmer tosses this out, that's not my job. My job is to sow the seeds. God's job is to make them grow. And if it's my responsibility to sow, Hosea 10:12 says, sow righteousness for yourself. Reap the fruit of unfailing love. Psalm 126:5 says, those who sow with tears will reap songs of joy. Back in chapter 6 of Galatians, verse 7, it says, do not be deceived. God cannot be mocked. A man reaps what he sows. And if sowing is our responsibility, what we sow is also our responsibility. Because we know we could sow healthy things. You know, Nate tells me all the time, discipline. If you wake up and you sow in your workout time, you will reap the benefits. We know we could sow healthy things. We know we could sow positivity of affirmation, love. We could sow all of those things. But as much as we could sow healthy things, we can also sow things to feed our flesh. Unhealthy things. We sow pride and we reap a harvest of division and separation. We sow self-righteousness and we find ourselves alone. We sow lust, gossip. We sow all of these unhealthy things in our life. And that Paul says this in verse 8. He says, whoever sows to please their flesh, from the flesh will reap destruction. And sometimes when we look at our lives and we see destruction in our lives, can we go back, reverse engineer and say, what have I been sowing in my life? Have I been waking up at 6:30 to do year-end prayer? Am I sowing that, seeking the Lord? Or what else am I sowing in my life? Because it is clear that when you sow to the flesh, you will reap destruction. But there's a promise. He says, whoever sows to the Spirit, sow to please the Spirit, from the Spirit will reap eternal life. So you got to be intentional with what you sow in your life. You got to think about the things that you speak into your life, that you add into your life. The way you talk to your wife or not talk to her. The way you speak to your kids or not speak to them. Be intentional to sow the things that you want produced. Don't plant orange seeds if you're looking for apples. So I'm not a farmer. My sister, though, she's my sister, Farmer Trin. She's not here today, but big shout out to Farmer Trin and I guess Farmer Jody. They lead an e-group called Farmers and Faith. Okay, and when it comes to farming, they know a lot. So any farming questions, just go ahead and ask them, okay? But I'm not a farmer, but I can imagine, I've picked a few weeds out of my lawn. I've done that, I've done that. I spray mainly because I know some of you guys are judging. It's like, that produces cancer. Like, don't do that. And I'm like, man, these weeds are going out of control, okay? But it's hard work. It's hard work. I can imagine if weeding is that, I get sweaty, I gotta go shower right away. I'll shower 4 times if I'm out working on the yard, Imagine farmers. Farmers are out there, they're plowing to prepare the land, they're planting their seeds in perfect increments. So when you see the orchard, they're growing perfectly. You know, when you drive past the freeway and they go, y'all know what I'm talking about, right? Okay. Somebody had to do that. Somebody took their time and said, okay, 18 inches. It sounds like hard work. Not only that, they fertilize it. They water it constantly. All of those things, I can imagine. Sowing is hard work. And so the same thing in our lives. If you want healthy things, sowing healthy things is hard work. It's hard putting your pride aside and sowing a compliment to your wife. It's hard speaking things in your husband when you don't see him yet. You want to see a great man of God? Start sowing seeds. Start prophesying that. I'm telling you, you guys have so much power. Wives, you have so much power to shape every aspect of your man. Just speak it into them. But I know it's hard. Sowing is hard. But a life of abundance, the life of impact and the life of purpose that we're talking about, more so than the preparation that's required in sowing is about faith. Sowing is about faith. The currency of the kingdom of God is measured in faith. Okay? As a kid, ever since I was young, like I would spend so much time fantasizing about winning the lottery. Okay? Some people are laughing about the lottery. Some people were thinking other things, okay? I would think about it. As a kid, I would think about this. You know, we had a pool when I was young, and I was like, man, if I won the lottery, I would cap off the pool, and then I would make a stairway down, and underneath the pool would be all my favorite arcade games, you know? Yeah, I spent some time. I drew it out in my head. You know, the way I draw out the church now, I did that. You know, drew out every bit, measured 28 inches for each arcade game. Now they have an iPad. That's all they need. Now they don't need any of that. But as I grew, we've all heard the horror stories, right? When you win the lottery, the curse of the lottery, people end up just as broke as before they won. Like all of these crazy things. And I was thinking, man, if it happened to me, I'm going to be prepared. So I put steps in place. You know, can I share some of the steps? Okay, for step one, stay calm. Don't rip the ticket. Stay calm because we do bad things when we're not calm, okay? Step two, find a lawyer. Find a financial expert. I'm serious. I spent time doing this, okay? Step three, tie to the church. Okay, I think about this like for real, okay? If I won the lottery, you best believe we'd have a brand new building right now. I'm not going to lie about that, okay? I can't be the only one, right? You guys are super engaged because you're like, you're missing a couple of steps, Pastor. You spent more time studying that than. So one day, I decided to share this with Lisa. I was like, hey, babe, you've ever thought about what you would do if we win the lottery? She goes, yes. She's like, I would do this, do this, do this. In fact, pulled out a giant list. I have it with me. She had all of these things, and just for fun, we decided together, we would just point out all the steps, all of the things we would do. And we started talking about the church, our families, savings. We started talking about the neighborhood we would live here. And while we were talking about all of that, a thought came to mind. We don't even buy lottery tickets. And I wonder how many of us go to God with all the plans that we have, okay? The plan of the business that we want to have one day. You know, the plans of the marriage, the healthy marriage that we're going to have, the nonprofit that we're going to grow, that we're going to build from scratch. And we don't have the seed. We don't have a seed in the ground. I can tell you right now, I'm not telling you to go buy lottery tickets. But you can't win it if you're not in it. You can't win it if you're not in it. How much more faith would you have if you had a seed in the ground? Okay, I could be praying for tomatoes all day long, but the minute I put tomato seeds down, I have faith. My faith is raised when I have a seed in the ground. And if faith is the currency of heaven, that's what we say. Faith is how we please God. The level of faith is how God responds. Then I want as many seeds as I can out there. As many seeds that I can scatter out there so my faith can meet where I want God to produce. 2 Corinthians 9:6 says, remember this, whoever sows sparingly will also reap sparingly. And whoever sows generously will also reap generously. If I have seed in the ground, I'm gonna expect a harvest. I'm not gonna hope for a harvest. If I have seed in the ground, if I put down cucumbers, I'm gonna expect cucumbers. And that expectation is filled with faith. When you put a seed in the ground, it's filled with faith. No matter how long it takes, I know the promise of God. Verse 9, it says, let us not become weary in sowing seeds or doing good, for at the proper time we will reap a harvest if we do not give up. I'm sowing seeds. With my kids, I'm sowing consistency, praying with them every night, speaking godly conversations at the age of 3 and 5. With my wife, I sow quality time. I sow acts of services. An occasional, baby, you looking good right now. Come on, sow some seeds. With my job, I'm sowing integrity, excellence in everything that I do, no matter who is looking. With our directors and leaders in the church, I'm sowing development. I'm sowing care. I pray for them, their spouse, their families. I'm sowing seeds. You better believe I'm full of faith for a harvest. In fact, my faith is most full when I'm actively sowing seeds. Whenever you feel like, man, I believe that God could do it, but I just don't have the faith He would do it for me, sow a seed. When you sow a seed, your faith is raised. In Psalm 126:6, it says, those who go out weeping, carrying seeds to sow, will return with songs of joy, carrying sheaves with them. And if I want to be known as a man that lived for God, that loved his family the way God designed it, that served people wholeheartedly as if I was serving God Himself, I'm going to be sowing seeds. But we know it's hard work. We just said it. Sowing seed is hard work. Who thinks like digging soil or plowing when we're talking about sowing seeds? Because I'm like, it's hard work. But here's something that you might want to know. Even the harvest is full of hard work. Even the harvest is hard work. God designed us to work. The first thing He gave to Adam was a job, then a woman. I prayed for kids, and the harvest was late nights, diaper changes. I prayed for that promotion, and it was more meetings and more responsibilities. When I prayed for impact, you know what it looked like? It looked like unexpected phone calls, text messages. Tuesday afternoon weddings, Thursday funerals. The harvest is hard work. When you pray for abundance, you know what the harvest is? Your fight to fight the greed inside of you. That's the harvest. Once God starts giving you abundance, you start having to fight this nature to hoard. Because trust me, it's harder to write bigger checks. I have more to give, but I also got to write a bigger check. You've heard the saying, be careful of what you pray for. And if the seed is in the ground, please expect a harvest. But be ready for the work that comes with that harvest. But it's all worth it. Because we remember what it was like without purpose, without impact, living a life with lack. We know that it's worth it. This hard work is worth it. And the last thing you want to know, if you want abundance, if you want purpose and impact, you got to sow. You got to know that sowing is a choice. Everyone has seed. God made sure of that. God made sure that every single person in this room has seed. But sowing that seed is a choice. A few years ago, or quite a bit of years ago, I remember I was hanging out with a friend of mine named Billy. And we were over at his house late at night. And Billy's one of the most successful guys I know. Like incredibly, one of those incredibly like doesn't make sense successful guys. But at the time, he wasn't yet. Okay, and I remember I was talking to him, and you know how there's certain people that when God blesses them with everything, you would not be surprised because you already know that it was in him. You just know that he was going to be successful because Billy was a sower. He was a sower. He gave more generously than anybody I've ever known. Okay, this is what happened. We were sitting over at his house and we were talking, and he started sharing something he's been studying. He said, "I've been studying about the first fruits," and I said, I started thinking like most of us try to avoid those types of studies, you know. Like, are we talking about sowing today? I'm gonna miss church. He's looking for more ways to give. And so I knew this about him. So when he first started talking about sowing, Lisa and I, we had just started tithing earlier that year. So I felt good in that conversation, you know. It's like, yeah, it was sowing, that for sure. I got you. And it was like, well, I was thinking about the first fruits. I've been studying about it. And this came to mind that if the first belongs to God and he blesses the rest, I'm going to give him his first. I'm going to give him my first. And I was like, yeah, that's what we do. I got you. And he says, no. I'm going to give him all of my first. And I was like thinking about it until he said, if I gave him my first, that means he blesses the rest. If I gave him my first of the year, he'll bless the rest of my year. He just found ways to say, man, I want to be more generous. And the more I thought about it, I was like, man, that makes a lot of sense. And so I go home that night and I kept thinking about this. I go to Lisa and I started telling her about the conversation I had. And I was like, yeah, he's given his first entire commission check. In fact, he said that year was a little bit smaller, so he's given his first two commission check. This is thousands and thousands of dollars. When we were in our 20s, that's a lot of money, okay? In fact, 20 years ago, that was a lot. 2 years ago, that was a lot of money. Okay. And so like, this is what he did, and I started telling Lisa about this, and in the middle of this conversation, Lisa, if you know her, she is an activator, meaning she doesn't like small talk, which is difficult for me because I talk a lot, okay? But in the middle of this conversation, she said, well, if you want to give our first checks, let's do it. And I said, it was just a story. Relax. But after we spoke about it a little bit more, we ended up doing it. You know, first checks, we wrote it over to the church and we forgot about it. We didn't tell anybody, we just did it. And the year goes by and I remember coming back to Billy's house and we're sitting at his house in South Sacramento. And somewhere we're drinking tea. This is the thing he does. We're at like 11 p.m. and he's like, you want tea? And I was like, I guess we want tea. And somehow the conversation comes up that about that. And I said, remember last year when we were talking about the first fruits and giving the first fruits? He was like, yeah, I remember. And I said, I did it. Like Lisa and I, we went home and we did it. And he said, for real? I said, yeah, we did. And he goes, what happened? I didn't know if I was supposed to be looking to see what happens. He said, you planted a seed. There has to be a harvest. And so I took that night and I started processing, started thinking about the promotions that Lisa got that year and my business taking off more than it ever had that year. And then the longer we went into it and the years that I've passed, less, like the conversations about finances, the stress about finances became smaller and smaller throughout our lives. I planted a seed. There was a harvest, even when I wasn't looking for it. We all have seeds to give. We all have seeds that God has given us. But sowing is a choice. And some of us, the truth is, we're kind of nervous. We're kind of scared with the fruit that the small amount of seeds that we already have. We're trying to protect as much as we can. And that's not how this law works. The law of sowing and reaping does not work that way. In fact, it does the wrong way. You might be thinking, my finances right now are in shambles. I barely have enough to take care of myself, let alone give. But not only that, it's clear in the Bible. I'm gonna show it to you. Proverbs 11:24, it says, one person gives freely, yet gains even more. Another withholds unduly, but comes to poverty. A generous person will prosper. Whoever refreshes others will be refreshed. It's clear in the written text, but even if I didn't ever find this verse, I could have told you. I've met enough people, I've seen enough stories. The people who say they don't have enough to give is always in lack. And the people who always finds way to give always have more to give. I see it all the time come into reality right in front of us. Because it's the law. When we throw an apple up, the law of gravity says it's coming down. And when we sow a seed, you're gonna reap a harvest. It's the constant of how God designed it. Sow into what you want to reap. And if you're at a point right now when you're looking at lack in your life, sow into that lack to someone else. My marriage has grown exponentially when we started investing into other marriages. Sometimes we can't do date nights. We pay for somebody else's date night. That's our conversation right now. We want to sow into what we want for our marriages. You want a business one day? Go serve. Go serve somebody's business. Go get in there. I remember I counseled a couple of people who had entrepreneurial aspirations, and I was like, go do it for free for somebody. Just go in there. Start their LLC for them. Go out there, fill out all the paperwork. You know what you get out of that? Knowing exactly how to do it when it's time to do yours. If you're stuck in your finances right now, give. Give faithfully. If you're feeling a lack of purpose, serve wholeheartedly. Serve somebody else's purpose, and God will give you yours.